Welcome back to the Connected podcast. I'm thrilled to bring you an extraordinary collection in which some incredible students take the driver's seat and host dynamic conversations with professionals from across the higher education sector, discussing the vital topic of student belonging. Back with another fabulous episode is Callum Perry. Callum is talking to Ruth Bonazza from Middlesex University. Ruth is a lecturer in academic writing and language and works on the foundation year programme that specifically supports health and education students to develop their academic literacies. Ruth is currently completing her doctorate in education at the Open University in Applied Linguistics.
And I know that you're doing some work in your EdD about belonging, so I'm really keen for us to have a great in-depth discussion about everything to do with research, belonging in research, types of methodologies for research. So do you want to start off by just explaining what your research is about, what you're doing and what you're hoping to achieve with your research?
Yeah, thanks. So in my doctorate of education, I looked at perceptions of identity and belonging amongst student and tutor participants in a post-92 university context, and specifically how these perceptions of identity and belonging can affect the ways that participants engage with academic writing. But in my research, I also argue that in order to understand student belonging, tutors must also have to be brought into the discussion as more than just facilitators, but also as individuals who have their own complex relationships with, higher education, and also sense of belonging. So what I found probably corresponds to a lot of the research that has been talked about by other podcasts, in other podcasts, and that is that belonging in higher education isn't just about fitting in or having good relationships on campus, but it's deeply personal, individual, and shaped by things like background, identity, different times and experiences, and also different sites of a student's life. And then this kind of problematizes this sort of dominant narratives about belonging for retention. So that's my question. So around belonging, I have two big questions. So what does belonging mean for my participants? And then how was I going to figure that out?
Big questions. And I'm super excited to be able to talk to you a little bit more, I suppose, about how we research belonging and how we actually capture our understandings and participants' experiences about belonging. I've been involved in work at our own institution around belonging, and we've used a lot of qualitative, kind of collaborative, creative methodologies. So from your work that you've been doing, just sort of, if you could give us a summary of how is belonging normally researched? What types of methods dominate that kind of research space at the moment?
Yeah, so I've probably, like yourself, noticed that there are, both theoretical contributions. So this is what belonging is, individual sense of identities, social identities, and this kind of more theoretical part of, judging what belonging is. And also this more quantitative methods, which actually I think are also really valuable in this discussion as it sort of showcases larger, what happens over a larger cohort and can do that. But like you, I was really interested in, what creative ways can I, look at belonging, and also very influenced by people like Dawn Mene and Gillian Rose and Fatima Awan, who look at the idea that visuals can open up deeper conversations, deeper, more meaningful collaborations about, what this concept means to people.
Yeah. And that's really interesting, isn't it? Because, I suppose for a while, in literature, we sometimes see these kind of belonging scales and getting individuals to rate how much they feel they belong, or associated characteristics, and having a rating scale around those characteristics, which kind of contribute to an overall quantitative idea of what belonging is, and that kind of pre and post results of belonging. And so what you're talking about there in terms of kind of creative methods and visual methods and trying to draw on people's experiences seems to be where lots of that research is kind of perhaps moving towards. And I just wondered whether what kind of thoughts you had, or the value that you place on those types of methods for bringing about conversations about experiences of belonging. What is so powerful about those kind of creative or more participatory based methods, do you think?
Yeah, well, I find that they bring up the unexpected quite often. So if you have a survey, or a scale that you're using, which again, is very, is its own method and a useful one at that, but you're coming in with a preconceived notion of what belonging is because you have to design the scale accordingly. Whereas if you're coming in with a more visual approach, you're already starting from that sort of social constructivist lens and kind of basis that you are seeing what your participant even considers to be belonging. And that can bring a lot of surprising kind of results as well. Even questioning whether for some participants belonging actually matters compared to other other experiences and effective qualities.
Yeah. And I know you mentioned about the importance of staff also having an understanding, but also us understanding how they feel they belong as a kind of key factor to enhancing student belonging. Um, how has your research explored those staff experiences, and why is that so important for the fostering student belonging, do you think?
Yeah, both part of the same conversation, I think, and also I'm a very like yourself, very insider researcher, so
Yes. Yeah.
I'm very interested in the ways that I'm practicing, and I'm using the research to inform my practice to inform the questions that I ask in my research as well. And I noticed that, yeah, many times more institutional definitions of belonging leave out the very often precarious nature of staff roles, especially staff roles that are traditionally associated with things like belonging and facilitation of belonging. So, having tutors within the research is really important to understanding, the student experience as well, but also improving, our higher education culture. And so, yeah, bringing both those conversations together is really important.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting there as well is about maybe the opportunities that opens up for this kind of co-participatory research where we've got staff and students involved in the kind of understanding and meaning of belonging. Is that something that you have seen in what you've been researching, or do you think that's an underrepresented or underutilized method within understanding and researching belonging?
Well, that would I wish that I could say yes. But actually, that's, I think, a really good next step as well. So at the moment, the research that I was doing was, looking at narratives that were gathered in with students or with tutors. But I think as far as my dissemination goes, it needs to bring those two conversations together, and this, maybe in real time. And I would be really interested in doing, moving that towards, like you're saying, kind of gathering both staff and students feedback within the same session. I think that would be really valuable insight. Do you see any of that in the research that you've been looking at?
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, my PhD, like you, is looking at is perhaps related ideas around belonging and relational pedagogy, but is looking at concepts like critical thinking and criticality. But what I've definitely seen is that there's still this sort of this kind of binary approach to, well, this is what staff think critical thinking or belonging is, and this is what students think critical thinking or belonging is, and they don't always marry up. So we're looking at comparing the two as opposed to trying to use research as a way to make meaning between and kind of share and co-create new meanings and construct new ideas around those types of concepts. And I wondered whether it was the same for you around belonging. So have you found that staff literature looks at staff and they look at students and compare the two as opposed to actually thinking about the impact that each other's meanings have for one another? Is it kind of still quite binary?
Yeah, I would say so. And I don't see as much relationship on, or as much research, excuse me, on staff sense of belonging as I do see on tutor sense of belonging. That sort of area is more focused, that I've seen is more focused on professional identity and professional identity formation, and not so much about sort of the university community aspect of it, or how it might affect the way that they're facilitating or not able to facilitate student sense of belonging or the relationships there. Absolutely. But I also see in my own research that there's some key similarities between, staff and students, what they want from their universities, what they see, their own role and sort of their position within the institution or the program. Yeah, interesting similarities that have come up too, which could be used, later on to improve the situation for both groups.
Yeah. So I'm thinking about, many of our listeners will be interested in the kind of the methodologies around this, and then we've talked a little bit about visual methods, but I wondered whether you wanted to expand a bit more on the power of the kind of visual creative methodologies in your research, but in more general around understanding these experiences.
Yeah, so I did in my narration, so I looked at oral and visual narrations, and one was part of it was graphic elicitations in the form of drawings that were done with pen and paper, and the other form was digital collage, where I had a screen up and participants could choose images and then caption images. So it was a really kind of interesting addition, and it became not just an addition actually to the research, but the center of the research. And so throughout the interview, participants were referring back to a part of their image, or a caption that they had written earlier on in the interview. So it made it really rhizomatic in the way that it was sort of weaving backwards and forwards within time. So that's also makes it much more powerful. That it, these discussions become ongoing, and sort of woven into objects and conceptions and representations, as well. But of course, that also makes it very challenging to transparently and rigorously review.
Yeah, and so it sounds from what you're saying like they had an opportunity to do these kind of creative methodologies, and then there was an interview kind of that went alongside that. So
Yeah.
did you find that actually by doing the creative work that it allowed them to have a lot more clarity or confidence over sharing their experiences? Did that help to enhance those more kind of traditional methods?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think so. And I'm thinking about also the sort of relative levels of comfort with the interview scenario as well. So, of course, the academics who were a part of the research are very used to sort of a research culture. But this was the first time that any of my students had been involved in anything, academic study, and they had such a leap of faith to even, come out and be a part of this. And they were, as you would imagine, thinking about this as a sort of a test scenario, I'm going to be asked questions, am I going to answer correctly? And you could kind of hear that in the discussion early on, am I saying the right thing, or is that what you were looking for in that question? And then moving to sort of these visuals and creative approaches meant that there was a more of a confidence, and suddenly the answers became much more about what they were bringing in, and what they confident basically, because they were the ones who brought in an image, and they could be the ones who explained it, and really located why this image was this image of a cog, or this image of a Jenga tower, why that was important to them. So yeah, and that.
Excellent. I've got so many questions and such little time to ask them. You talked earlier about a kind of insider, kind of educator researcher position, which I suppose a lot of listeners or a lot of colleagues across the sector will kind of identify with that. I wonder if you could reflect on your own kind of personal kind of identity as a academic and your level of belonging. And I wonder whether the research has changed or altered your own identity and sense of belonging towards your institution or to your work. And how has doing the research around this area affected your own identity and belonging?
Oh. Well, it's also very interesting to think about that question in terms of, the many hats that we wear as researchers, as students and learners, as educators and learners. So I guess that this research was a way to pull all of those identities together and explore them. But I also needed a bit of a distance as well, or at least to be very transparent about the ways that was coming into my research or not. Yeah, that sort of, but the research, yes, it did, kind of affect the way that I work. It's definitely affected the way that I am in the courses that I teach on. It also changed my way that I also look at visuals. I went from being slightly interested in this as a methodology, kind of looking at, and then looking at it as a possibility, and then realizing how important it is to sharing stories. So and as far as sense of belonging goes, it sort of grounded me also in, yes, this is important to look at. These experiences are important to speak about.
Yeah, and I kind of asked that question because I think for participants as well, there's something about the bringing together of different individuals to kind of create a mini community to do a piece of research. And I wonder whether actually just the act of coming together and creating a shared space to do some of this work has actually inadvertently supported student participant or staff participant belonging as a result.
Yeah, so if there's something about being a part of a research project that makes you feel more that you've contributed. And there's research on particularly kind of that relational aspect of joining a project and being able to share your stories as well. And I hope that was part of it. It was also very a snapshot into a very tumultuous time. So my research spanned 2019 to 2025, or well, no, 2024, I guess. But that was a very different and strange period for us, as educators and learners, and so that was also part of this.
Yeah, I think we can take a lot from our understanding of belonging or relational pedagogy as sort of like a kind of foundation for supporting good qualitative practice, isn't it? And I suppose, like you say, recognizing some of the biases or the our own meaning and interpretation that may well influence that data and that research, but actually there's something to be said for how do you create an environment which allows your participants to explore their ideas, share experiences with each other, open up and show vulnerability in those spaces so that you really get kind of true meanings and experiences. So I think there's a lot we can learn from concepts of belonging for actually belonging to a research space and how that then impacts on the type of research that we do and the challenges and benefits that come with that. So it's really interesting to hear your thoughts on that. I'm just thinking about future directions then and the future of belonging research. What do you think, or how do you see the future directions for using these sorts of visual methods or creative methods to understand belonging in higher education in the future? Where do you see it going?
Right. So I think, big question. So I think that there's an increasing interest, or there were, in this as a topic and this as an approach. And I think that it will be useful to look and compare the ways that we analyze data in a transparent way to sort of continue this research. I think that's really key. So if you're using visuals, how are those visuals collated? How are they being used? How are they being analyzed and sort of divided up as well, and kind of looked at as a whole? So that for me, like, it's sense of belonging, but we also need to make sure that we're rigorous and transparent in the approaches if we do intend to use visual approaches.
Yeah, really. We could have a whole other conversation about how, the impact of those kind of visual methodologies and the images that you select, or the resources you select, and how that may have an impact on the responses that students give, or participants give, staff participants give. So just as a kind of key takeaway then, if anybody's interested in or thinking about doing research of this nature around belonging, what would your kind of top tips be for going away and thinking about doing kind of these visual methodologies as part of research around belonging?
Well, to just be very open about it, but also to look at the process, even from the beginning, when you're looking and exploring the different approaches, to use that as the start of your research, so that you're documenting that in addition to when you choose your research methodology, and then go through with it, just to show how your understanding of the visuals have changed over time, and to surround yourself with other people like yourself who are interested in the visual. If you're doing it with supervisors, if you're doing a doctorate project or postgraduate project, to bring in supervisors who are open and curious as well about the topic. That's been really helpful for me, just to have that kind of evolving conversation.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for coming to talk to us, Ruth. It's been so interesting, and I'm sure that we'll carry on these conversations. I'm sure colleagues will be really interested about these areas, and it's so lovely to hear about methodologies and thinking about how we actually do the research around these things, as well as the kind of practice-based approaches which lots of our colleagues will bring to the table as well. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. It's been lovely to talk to you, and I hope to be able to do it again soon.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you for listening to the Connected podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please check out the rest of our extraordinary Voices of Belonging collection and stay connected.